Welcome back, everyone. Today we're making a skate and yoga fanny pack. And that means this fanny pack has the capabilities of holding a skateboard and a yoga mat, or pretty much anything else that has a similar shape. And it's only one pattern for both styles. And you can also make this without the holders and just the fanny pack. And this project is on the easier side, so if you are new to sewing, you should have no problem following the easy step-by-step tutorial. With all that being said, don't forget to grab the printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you'll need a half yard for your main fabric, and I recommend using a canvas, denim, or twill. These are all very durable fabrics and they're easy to work with. I'm actually going to be using a lighter weight twill, and when you use a fabric like this, the finished product is a little bit more flimsy. So if you're looking for a stiffer, solid bag look, try using a heavier weight fabric. And again, you can use any type of fabric for this project, so get creative with it and use the fabric you like the best. And that's going to be for the main bag, but for the outside holders, I'm using a heavier weight upholstery fabric. If you do plan on making this for a skateboard, keep in mind you have grip tape, and that grip tape is going to be rubbing on the fabric. So if you're using a lighter weight fabric on the holders, that grip tape is going to wear the fabric and make a hole. But if you're doing it just for a yoga mat, you can use any fabric on the outside holders and it's going to hold up great. You'll need a half yard for your secondary fabric, and I recommend using a lighter weight fabric. This is going to be for the lining on the bag portion. I'm using a lightweight nylon. I found this is a great fabric for lining, and all around I just like the nylon feel inside the bag. You'll need 3 yards of 1.5 inch webbing, and this is going to be for the main strap on the bag. Going along with that 1.5 inch webbing, you'll need 1 buckle and 2 strap adjusters. We'll get more into this once we get started, but we're going to be making adjustment points on both sides of the strap. You'll also need 1 to 2 yards of 1 inch webbing. This is going to be used for the hooks on the front of the bag and also the buckles that are going to be holding the covers. And we want it to be smaller so it hides behind the outside 1.5 inch webbing strap. And going along with that 1 inch webbing, you'll need 2 buckles. Again, these are 1 inch to match the 1 inch webbing. You'll need 2 14-inch zippers, and I'm going to be cutting mine off of a zipper roll. So if you're cutting yours off of a roll, you can go a little bit less than 14. You just want it to be longer than the actual panel width. But if you're buying yours at the store, make sure you get at least a 14-inch zipper, if not bigger, because we can always trim up the ends. You'll need at least 20 inches of 1 inch Velcro. This is going to be used to hold down the webbing straps and also to wrap up the cover around the strap so it's hidden. You'll need 1 yard to 1.5 yards of cord. Going along with that cord, you'll need 4 cord stoppers and 1 cord buckle. All these together, we're going to use it on the back side of the skateboard to cinch it up around the trucks, and on the yoga mat, we're going to use it to cinch the entire thing together for that extra support. Lastly, you'll need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. Before you tape it together, the best thing to do is to cut off the top and one of the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pages for a perfectly aligned pattern. Once you have all your supplies gathered and your pattern printed out, it's time to move into cutting. And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. Be sure to check your printer alignment for the best possible results. And from here, we're going to cut on the outside of the black line. After cutting, you should end up with 2 bottom side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 back zipper side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 2 front zipper side panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 4 strap end panels, all cut out of your main fabric. 2 front flap panels, both cut out of your main fabric. 2 front pocket panels, 1 cut out of your secondary fabric and 1 cut out of your main fabric. 4 main panels, 2 cut out of your secondary fabric and 2 cut out of your main fabric. And these next panels are optional. If you're choosing to add the skateboard and yoga holder, you'll need 4 of the cap panel cut out of your main fabric and 2 webbing sleeve panels cut out of your main fabric. Alright, moving on to assembly, we're going to start by grabbing the front flat panels, lay the panels out, and place the right sides together. As you can see on the pattern, we're going to stitch the curved edge, and we're going to stitch that at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the top edge unstitched. Before we pull the right sides out, if you're working with a heavier weight fabric, it might be best to trim the corners just to reduce a little bit of that bulk on the seam allowance. Flip the right sides out, poke out the corners, and press the bottom edge. With the panel nice and pressed, we're going to add a top stitch to the bottom edge. And I'm using an edge presser foot to get a nice uniform stitch. After finishing off the top stitch, there's one more thing I want to do to this panel, and that's cleaning up the top edge. And to do this, I'm going to be using a serger. The serger is going to cut and also stitch the edge to prevent fraying. If you don't have a serger, I recommend switching your machine to a zigzag stitch and stitching directly on that edge. The little details like this will make your project more professional and last longer. Go ahead and place this panel off to the side and grab your front pocket panels. And to start, we're not going to need both of these panels, so you can place the secondary fabric off to the side, because first we're going to be adding the webbing strips to the main fabric. And I'm going to be using a 1-inch width webbing for these straps, that way I can fit 2 rows and have more loops. Feel free to use a smaller webbing to add an extra row. Using the pattern as a guide, I'm going to lay out the strips on the right side of the fabric. Be sure to cut the strip long enough so you can roll the ends over to hide the raw edge. And if you don't like the spacing, you can always move them around to find that sweet spot. The stitches will be added 2 inches apart from one another. Again, if you want to customize that, add more or less, you can totally do that too. When it comes to adding the stitch, you can do a zigzag stitch, or you can just do a regular straight bar tack. I recommend going back and forth a few times so you really secure that strip down. And another quick tip is matching your thread color to your webbing color. This will hide any little imperfections. After finishing up, take a look at it, see if it's what you're looking for, clip something onto it, test it out and see if it works, because at this point you can de-thread it and reorganize it in a way that's going to work best for you. Moving on, grab the secondary fabric, locate the zipper edge at the top of both panels, find one of your 14-inch zippers, and if it's not 14 inches, it's totally fine. As long as it goes past the width of both panels, you're good to go. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Check to see if all the layers got stitched together. If everything is looking good, we're going to flip the wrong sides together, lining up the outside edge. We're going to be adding a top stitch to the zipper edge, so the goal is to have both of those edges line up perfectly. Place a few pins to keep everything from moving around and add your top stitch. And using an edge presser foot really gives you a professional finish. Slide this panel to the side and grab your main panels. For this step, we only need one of the main fabric panels, so place the other ones off to the side. With the right side facing up, we're going to place the new pocket assembly on top of the main panel. Line up the bottom edge and roll over the top portion of the zipper. Flip the panel over that zipper, holding the spot of the zipper, pin it down, flip the pocket back down, and if the edges line up, we're going to then flip it back over and stitch the zipper at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After stitching, we're going to flip it back down, make sure the edges line up, and that's going to be our pocket placement. If the side or bottom edges don't line up, I recommend de-threading and trying again. Before we move on, we're going to add a quick tack stitch on the bottom and side edges of the pocket assembly, locking all those layers together. This helps organize everything and essentially make it one new layer. Next, we're going to grab the complete front flap panel. We want it to fold down and cover the zipper, so we're going to place the right side of the flap panel to the right side of the main panel, lining the top edge of the flap panel up directly against the zipper. Place a few pins and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If you serge the top edge, stitch on the outside of the thread. That way when you fold it back down, the thread won't be visible from the right side. The bottom edge of the flat panel should line up right with the top edge of the webbing. If everything is looking good, add a top stitch. This stitch will also help hold that flat panel down so it's not just flapping all around. But to really keep it in place, we're going to be adding snap buttons. And you don't have to use these exact ones. You can use clips, you can use magnetic, pretty much whatever you want. When it comes to the placement, you can place them anywhere on that edge. You just want to make sure you don't snap into the webbing or into your zipper. Once you found the spot, we're going to snip or punch out the hole. Since this is the outmost edge, we're going to be using the button portion of the snap. Feed the button into your opening. Grab the opposite side of the button that works with that particular snap, feed it onto the opposite side of the flat panel. And to install these, it's really simple. We're going to be using hammer dies. Each side of the button has a different die. For this side, we're going to be using the point, and it's actually really simple. All you have to do is feed that pointy end into the back side of the snap, use the base plate so you don't wreck your table or the top side of the button, and hammer it down with moderate force. And repeat this process for both of the buttons on the flap. Lay the top button flat and see where it falls on the fabric, mark that point, and snip your holes. Grab the opposite side of the snap. For this side of the snap, we're going to grab the longer portion and feed it from the back side of the fabric up to the front. And be sure to only feed it through the pocket portion of your panel. Connect the top portion of the button, and we're going to be using the opposite die. It's going to be the cup looking die. Don't forget to place the base on the back side of the button. Place the die on the button and hammer it down with moderate force. And do the same thing for the opposite side. Snap the buttons together, make sure everything lines up. If it's looking good, we can place this panel to the side, grab all of the other main panels. We only need one of our secondary fabrics, and we're going to place the wrong side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of our new assembly. Line up the outside edges, and just like we did in a previous step, we're going to add a tack stitch at the top, the sides, and the bottom. We want all these layers to be joined together so it's easier to sew the side panel on in later steps. And to finish off the front panel, we're going to add a zipper train. And this is only because we're using zipper from a zipper roll. You can add the zipper train to either side of the zipper. Move the zipper train towards the center of the panel, and your front pocket assembly is complete. Go ahead and place the assembly off to the side and grab your back zipper side panels. Along with the panels, we're going to grab our second 14-inch zipper. Same rules apply, just make sure the zipper is longer than the width of the panel. Place the right side of the zipper to the right side of the main fabric and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper, lining up the side edges, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Fold the wrong sides together and place a few pins along the top edge. Grab the front zipper side panel, and we're going to place it on the opposite side of the zipper. Locate the zipper edge on the pattern, and we're going to place the right side of the main fabric to the right side of the zipper and the right side of the secondary fabric to the wrong side of the zipper, lining up the side edges, and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to fold the wrong sides together, lining up the top edge. Place a few pins to keep everything lined up, because what we're going to be doing is adding a top stitch to both sides of the zipper. So we want those two layers to be lined up as perfect as possible. And then add a top stitch to both sides. After finishing up the top stitch, double check, make sure all the layers are looking good and even. And if you are using a zipper from the zipper roll, the next step is adding a zipper train. Again, you can add it to either side of the panel. It really comes down to preference on which way you like to open the bag. Move the zipper towards the center of the panel and grab your bottom side panel. We're going to be sewing the ends to the ends of our zipper assembly. Place the right sides of the main fabric together and the right sides of the secondary fabric together. Stitch the side edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Double check both sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together, and from here we're going to move to the opposite side. Place the right sides together and stitch that side edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Flip the right sides out, lining up each panel, locate the zipper ends, pull the two panels in opposite directions so the panels line up, and add a top stitch to both sides. After finishing up the stitch, you can move towards the inside, snip the zipper ends flush with the seam allowance. And this next step is optional. We're going to be cleaning up the outside edges by serging both sides all the way around. It's similar to what we did with the flat panel. We want to eliminate any fraying and also lock all these layers together. And if you don't have a serger, a zigzag stitch set to a wide width does just as good. But anyways, moving on, we can place this panel off to the side and grab our strap end panels. Along with the panels, you'll need 2 strips of 1.5 inch webbing. And you can cut these at 1 to 1.5 yards per strip. Keep in mind, it's easier to trim them down after the fact, so going bigger might be the better way to go. And we're going to do one assembly at a time, so place 2 of the panels off to the side. Locate the shorter side of the panel, and that's where we're going to be placing our webbing. Sandwich the webbing in between the panels with the right sides together. Repeat this for the opposite side, and we're going to stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I find it's best to start with the webbing end first so it locks it into position. Feel free to trim the corners to reduce any bulk. Flip the right sides out and line up the top edge. To keep the layers from moving around, we're going to place a pin directly in the center of the panel. And from here, we're going to add a top stitch around the outside edge. Along with the top stitch, we're going to add a box stitch towards the webbing side. Try to stitch back over the webbing on the panel side so that way you really lock that webbing with the panel, and it's going to make that strap super strong. And feel free to add more than just a box stitch. You can add an X stitch or more bar tack stitches. Pretty much the more you add, the stronger it will be and the longer it will last. Moving on, grab the last 2 main panels. You should have 1 main panel and 1 secondary fabric layer. Make sure the wrong sides are together and place the strap assembly panels on the right side of the main fabric layer. Line the strap assembly up directly in the center of the side and stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. After stitching, we're going to grab the zipper assembly and the front pocket assembly. Chalk out the centers on both assemblies. Locate the front side zipper panel, and this is a panel we're going to be lining up with the pocket assembly. So place the right sides together, lining up the center points on the top and bottom of each panel. Place a few pins, and we're going to stitch around the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And take your time with this panel. Make sure the panels are lined up as you're sewing, or else you're going to have a gap at the end of your stitch. Sewing loops like this can be difficult, but just keep in mind you can always go back, de-thread, and try it again. Before we move on, double check all the sides, make sure all the layers got stitched together, flip the right sides out, check it from the right sides. Sometimes a little portion will be sticking out, so it's best to correct that now before you get too far. But anyways, flip the wrong sides back out, grab the opposite main panel with your strap assembly sewn onto it. I like to roll the webbing up to keep it out of the way, mark the centers, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Place the right sides together, lining up the center marks, add a few pins, and stitch the outside edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And the main goal is to keep this back assembly lined up with the front assembly so everything looks symmetrical when you're done stitching. Open up the zipper, flip the right sides out, look around the bag, make sure all the corners are lined up and no layers are unstitched. And again, keep in mind you can always de-thread and try it again. Before we move on to finishing the strap, we're going to flip the wrong sides back out. And what we're trying to do is trim everything flush with the seam allowance. So if there's any corners popping out or if there's any zipper ends popping out, trim it all flush with the seam allowance. From here, I'm going to show you a few different techniques for cleaning up the raw edges on the inside of the bag. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. In this technique, you make your own double-sided bias tape to the size and fabric you want to use. All you do is cut your strips, feed it through your folder, and press it when it comes out the folder. It's very easy to do, and you get to customize the bias tape to your exact measurements. The second technique is using a double fold bias tape binder. This is the most efficient technique. You cut your strips, feed it through your binder, and sew it directly to your raw edge. And the last technique is using pre-made double fold bias tape. You are limited to colors, but it's very easy to use. You fold it over the edge and stitch it down. And you want to make sure you apply it all the way around the outside edge. I'm going to be using the double fold bias tape attachment. By far, this is the most efficient technique, so if you plan on making a lot of these bags, you might want to look into this option. Adding the bias tape also makes for a more durable finished product. But anyways, flip the right sides back out. And that's pretty much the hardest portion of the video. From here, everything else is fairly easy. Grab your 1.5 inch buckle and your two 1.5 inch strap adjusters. And I'm using a buckle that has double openings on both ends. You can have a double opening or a single opening, it's totally fine. We're going to start by adding our strap adjusters, and we want to add these to both sides of the webbing. Slide the adjusters down about a foot, grab the buckle, feed the webbing through the opening on the buckle, then back through the adjuster from the bottom side. Give yourself a little bit of slack so you have an opening. Roll the webbing end over once to hide the raw edge, and add a tack stitch, locking that webbing into position. Depending on the thickness of your webbing, you may want to take this stitch a little bit slow or use a heavy weight needle. And as you can see, you have a strap with plenty of adjustment room. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing to the opposite side because we want adjustments on both sides when we're carrying a skateboard or a yoga mat to even it out. Plus, it gives you more adjustment to wear this as a fanny pack, a shoulder bag, or a crossbody bag. And at this point, you can try the fanny pack on, make any minor adjustments. You can always de-thread, trim the webbing down, and restitch it. And another big reason we did this way is because we're going to be adding buckles onto these bottom strips because these strips don't move through the strap adjuster. It gives us a stationary position to place the buckles. But if you're not adding the holder onto the bag, the fanny pack is complete. Skip ahead to see the branding portion. In this next portion, we're going to be making the holder that slides onto the straps. It's a really simple process, and we're going to start with the webbing sleeve panel. And what we're going to do is hem the outside edge, starting with the shorter sides. Roll the edge over 1/4 inch, add a pin, and repeat this for all of the side edges. Add a top stitch to each side directly on top of the hem. And real quick, just like in previous steps, you can serge the outside edge before you stitch the hem to prevent future fraying. Next, we're going to do the same thing to the opposite side edges. Roll the edge over 1/4 inch and add a top stitch directly on top of the hem. Before we move on, you can snip the corners of the second hem on a diagonal. This will help hide the raw edges from the right side once we stitch it to the panel. Slide these panels to the side and grab your cap panels. Locate the sleeve placement guide on the pattern, and this is where we're going to be placing our panels. We're only going to be adding these to 2 of the panels, so you can place the other 2 off to the side. Place the panels with right sides facing up, and using the pattern, we're going to place our sleeve panels. This is a holder for our webbing, so we're going to stitch just the side edges and leave the top and bottom edge unstitched. And I recommend stitching directly on top of the hem stitch. If you are using different width webbing on your main strap, you want to adjust these to match the width of your webbing, because the goal is to get these as tight as possible around that main strap to reduce any slip. But anyways, moving on, grab the opposite 2 panels and we're going to hem the bottom edge. And you have 2 options. You can roll the bottom edge over once and hem it, or roll it over twice and completely hide that raw edge on the inside. It really comes down to the style of fabric you're using. I'm just going to roll my edge over once and stitch it down. Or another option is serging that bottom edge and rolling it over once to clean it up. Also, feel free to use more than one stitch. You can do a double stitch, you can do a decorative stitch. For the moment, we can place these panels off to the side and grab 4 5-inch strips of webbing and Velcro to match. We're going to be sewing the Velcro to the webbing, so it doesn't matter if you have adhesive Velcro or regular Velcro. And it doesn't matter which side of the Velcro you stitch to your webbing. I'm using adhesive. I like to stick it on. It makes it easier to place and then stitch it from there. I just find it can be a little bit difficult to place a pin through webbing, but we're only doing a few stitches, so it's not that big of a deal. And we're going to be using these on both sides of the cap panel, so that way we can tighten around the skateboard or the yoga mat. Place these to the side and grab your cap panels. Using the pattern, locate the webbing placement guide. Before we add the webbing strips, we want to first sew on the opposite side of the Velcro to the side that does not have the webbing sleeve, because we're going to be folding that webbing end over and we want it to land on the Velcro. This position may vary based on your hem, so just double check it before you sew it on. Once you're happy with the placement, stitch the outside edge of both Velcro strips. If you're looking for more adjustment room, you can sew that Velcro strip all the way across the panel. And from here, using the pattern, we're going to place the webbing strips. To make it easy, you can use the Velcro to line the webbing up and make sure the webbing is hanging off the edge about 1/4 of an inch. Grab the opposite side of the cap panel, place the right sides together, lining up the outside edge, and stitch at 1/4 inch seam allowance. After finishing up the stitch, we're going to snip the Velcro ends flush with the seam allowance. The next step is optional. We're going to be doing the same thing we did for the bag. We're going to be cleaning up that raw edge by adding double fold bias tape. If you did add the bias tape, a little trick is to go 1 to 2 inches past the actual start and end point. This will allow you to fold that end over, tack stitch it down, and make for a clean finish. It's also going to strengthen that point and really make sure when you put this over a skateboard, those ends don't break. Flip the right sides back out, unvelcro the webbing strips. For the next step, we need the fanny pack. We're going to slide the webbing into the sleeve on our cap panel. And as you can see, these are fairly easy to move up and down the webbing strip. And before we correct this, it's good to test the Velcro on the strap. Make sure it reaches the Velcro and can cinch down. And also the opposite way to fold down to hide it when you're not using the cap panel. Since there's not Velcro on both sides of the webbing, what you have to do is roll that webbing end over and stick it down. Or you can also add a little piece of Velcro at the end of the webbing so it sticks down nice and easy. Both ways work just as good. I just wanted to point that out before we get too far. But that's one of the big features about this pocket is that you can wrap it up on the strap and hide it if you're not using it, so that way you don't have to unclip it and pack it away. It can always be on your bag and ready to go. Back to the task at hand, we want to keep these from moving around up and down the strap. And the best way to do this is to add a buckle at the end of the webbing like I mentioned in previous steps. Adding it at the end will allow us to adjust the strap, and it's not going to have to go through that strap adjuster, and you can adjust it freely. Grab your 1-inch webbing and your 1-inch buckle, cut the webbing strip about 4 to 5 inches, feed it through the end of your buckle, roll the webbing end around the opposite end to hide that raw edge, place it directly on the webbing that feeds through the bottom side of your strap adjuster. And it doesn't have to be the exact spot, you can move it up and down just a little bit. Once you found that sweet spot, tack it down. And if you want, you can put this buckle on the strap end or further up the strap, further down the strap. As long as it's out of the way of the adjuster, you're good to go. And the reason we're using a buckle is that way we can unclip this pocket if we're not using it or if we don't want it on the bag, and it's not going to be always stuck on the bag. Grab a second strip of webbing that's about 7 inches, just enough so we can feed it through the opposite side of the buckle, roll the ends over, and tack it down. It also depends on how long you made the strap. If you made the strap a little bit longer, you might need to use a little bit more webbing. Once you found the right spot, tack it to the center of that cap panel. And this is going to be on the side opposite of the sleeve panel. The first thing to do is try it on, test it out, see if it works, because you can always de-thread that, adjust it, and make it work for your measurements. And that's the biggest thing about making your own bags, is that you should just make them personal to your measurements, because nothing on the market is gonna fit better than that. And this step may take a little bit of playing around with based on what fabric you're using and what type of webbing you're using. Place the fanny pack off to the side, grab both of the cap panels, and we're gonna place a little loop on the webbing sleeve panel. Cut the loop 2 to 4 inches, just enough that you can roll it over and sew it onto the end of the webbing sleeve panel. And if you don't want to use webbing, you can use leather or anything that you can make a little loop right there. For the video, I'm using webbing, and I'm going to tack it as close as I can to that edge. And you really want to add a nice tack stitch because these will take a lot of strain from the cord pulling on it. Feed the cap panels onto your strap, flip the panel over to the webbing sleeve side, and grab your cord. I cut mine into 2 half-yard strips. This can be trimmed down later. Feed it through your webbing loop, locate your 2 cord stoppers, and these are cord stoppers that have double openings. Feed the cord through the openings and slide the cord stopper down about 1 foot. Next, grab your cord buckle, and these are typically about a 1/2 inch width, and they have 1 opening on each side. Feed the cord ends through one side of the buckle opening. Pull the buckle down to the cord stopper, and feed your last cord stopper on all the way down to the buckle. This may seem like a lot, but I found it a really good way to tighten it around the trucks and also tighten that buckle down once you have it snapped together. To keep the components from sliding off, you can either knot the ends or you can find little end caps. There's a lot of different techniques you can use to finish those off. The easiest one is just burning it and melting them together, but this is only if you're using a poly base cord. If you're using a natural base, you're going to want to tie them off or add end caps. The cord can be trimmed down in future steps, but first you want to add the opposite side. Feed all the components on in the same order, use the opposite side of the buckle. Once you have it on, you're going to move all the components up towards the center, buckle it together, and see how much room you have. Before you actually go and trim the ends, put a yoga mat or a skateboard in there just to see how much room you actually have. And before I demonstrate how to put a skateboard or a yoga mat into the holders, I want to quickly show you how you can tuck this cord away into your main strap. What we're gonna do is stuff the cord in the cap panel opening, wrap the cap panel around the webbing strap and Velcro it down like we did in previous steps. And that's gonna tuck everything away securely so it's not flapping all around. And the final step is adding your branding. Get creative with it, add it anywhere on the bag that you see fits best. I like to use little leather strips because you can add them around the bag and also add them on the zipper pulls. Another fun feature with these is that you can clip different things to the leather tabs. So have some fun with it and do what you think looks best to you. I'm gonna show you how to add the skateboard first, and you want the grip tape on the inside of the webbing strap. Slide the cap panel onto the end of the skateboard and Velcro it down. It may take a little bit of maneuvering based on the width of your skateboard. Flip to the bottom side, grab the cord, cinch it around the trucks, and secure it down. And lastly, we're gonna clip the buckle and tighten it down using the cord stopper. And I tried a lot of different things making this design, and I promise this is the strongest way to go, and it's not gonna fall off those holders. And once you have the board on, you can play around with the strap adjusters to fine tune it to your measurements. And that's a big reason why we cut the webbing longer, so that way we can have more room to adjust it. And it's also way easier to trim it down if it's way too long. And after adjusting, all you have to do is try it on and fine tune it to your measurements. You can also customize the cap panels to match the width of your board exactly. I just went a little bit bigger because this is an 8.5 and I wanted it to fit most sizes. And lastly, I'm gonna show you how to fit the yoga mat into the holder. Roll your yoga mat up tight as possible so there's minimal movement. Feed the ends into the cap panel and Velcro it down tight. Flip over to the opposite side, clip the buckle closed and cinch it tight. And as you can see, it's a very quick process getting your yoga mat or your skateboard into the holder, so if you're trying to get up and go, you can go quick. I tested both the yoga mat and the skateboard vigorously. You can move around as much as possible and they're not gonna fall out. And there you have it, your skate and yoga fanny pack is complete. Hopefully yours turned out awesome. If it didn't turn out great the first try, sometimes these projects can be a little bit tricky. So the more you do them and the more you get used to sewing these style of bags, the better you will get. And using all these little tricks and tips should really bring your bag making skills to the next level. And I always like to see how your projects turn out, so tag me on Instagram at Properfit Clothing. But until then, I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.